Good evening. Time for another cheap heat discussion. I'm going to just jump right into it. No preamble. Well, maybe a little bit of a preamble. So I mostly talk about jazz records because that's mostly what I like. This is not going to be about jazz, though. I just got a new turntable, so I'm actually really enjoying the loudness of it. My previous turntable was a good turntable. It's a high quality turntable. I'm not going to name names, but it had a hum I couldn't get rid of. I've got this. It's a Bang & Olufsen Biogram 3400 that I bought pre-owned, and it sounds fantastic. I'm just dreading having to replace the cartridge, but I believe Stereosmith still makes them. Anyway, this cheap heat video, and I hope you think all of this is heat. I do. I think all these records are great. It's not about jazz. I talked about prog records in the past, and I like a lot of different kinds of music. Mostly I listen to jazz, though, so it's easier for me to talk about jazz, be a lazy man, talk about jazz. This is a record that I'm playing right now. It's a private issue, folk, new age kind of record. No vocals, all instrumental, very much in the vein of Leo Kottke, and maybe John Fahey, maybe a little bit more, maybe less weird than John Fahey. I love John Fahey, by the way. It's not a knock on him. Anyway, this can be had in a lot of different places. I'll show it really close. It's the Kiethe Lowrie Duet, and it's two guys, R. Kiethe and J.P. Lowrie. And they play guitars, percussion, and little keyboards. And this is kind of a nifty little record. We'll be listening to it the whole time I'm blathering about music. I really like this record. I was gonna flip it, and I listened to it, and I hung on to it. It kind of qualifies as heat, especially if you're into acoustic guitar music. All original stuff, private label. Good stuff from where are they from? I think they're from the Northeast somewhere. Bloomington, Indiana. I'm wrong again. And we're going to proceed with I got some world music pulled out here, some rock and roll, some other stuff. Mostly this is just neglected, obscure stuff you might pass over. Stuff that's maybe matter out of place. That's kind of a theme on some of these things. Like an artist doing something that they don't normally do. We'll get into that, hopefully not at too great length. Anyway, I'm going to show some world music. I've got these, they're sort of randomly ordered, so it's going to jump around. I'm sorry. This record I've seen locally for a couple of bucks, and I think it's on like Discogs and eBay for a couple of bucks. It's Ija Hadija, and the album is called Tongaret, and I was going to play this in the background, but it just didn't work because it's so good that it's distracting. It's a really cool record. It's she's Indonesian or Javanese or Balinese, excuse me, and it's not exactly pop music, but it's not exactly traditional Balinese gamelan music, although there is gamelan in it. It's really hard to categorize what she's up to. But I find this record amazing, frankly, just amazing. And it was recorded in the 80s. It came out, it's on Non-Such Explorer /Icon. And it can be found pretty easily for a few bucks. And if you're into Indonesian music or world music at all, you really need to check it out. And her voice is spectacular, really raw. It's a fantastic record. Staying in the South Pacific, here's another one I see around, and I believe it's online for a couple of bucks as well. eBay, Discogs is where I normally go. Sometimes you can turn these things up on Amazon. You got to look around. There's also that site CD and LP, although that's mostly European stuff. But if you look around and you're not too choosy about condition, you know, if you're accepting very good plus, and these ratings are arbitrary. I mean, I've bought VG plus records on eBay and Discogs that were VG minus or alternately near mint. And by the same token, I've bought near mint albums that have come to me and been all messed up. So it's a crapshoot. I generally trust a record that's VG plus, and sometimes I venture into the VG realm. So somebody asked me about that and said a lot of the records are not available in mint condition. And no, they might not be. They might cost a lot more if they're sealed or played once. I don't know. But keep looking, be persistent. Persistence is the name of the game. Anyway, I'll talk about this record. This is a little bit more traditional in terms of Balinese music. And it's got this great flute out in the front of it in the lead position called the suling. It's beautiful. This is all instrumental, unlike the Jogja DJ record. This is all instrumental, and it's called Sangala. And the name of the group is E Kostiara and Grupa Gapura. And it's also on Icon Records. This is before Icon was sponsored or picked up by Nonsuch. This is just a really cool gamelan record. It's not like the ethnic ones on Nonsuch, the old ones, or it's not like strictly world music. There's something a little bit more dynamic about this record. Again, it's not expensive, and it's just beautiful, fascinating music. And if you're an adventurous person, you'll dig it. I'm going to try to stick on the world music, quote unquote, tip here for a minute. I've got a lot of stuff here. This is the last really world music-y type record. And if you like African music, you really owe it to yourself to check these guys out. This was produced by Eno, believe it or not. And it sounds like it was produced by Eno. And it even says Brian Eno presents Edikanfo. And this is a really cool Afro-funk record. And for some reason, it does not go for much money at all. I was surprised. I thought, oh, this record's probably really expensive because African stuff's really expensive. Like the Makossa label was a bargain label when I was, growing up in the 70s and 80s. Find that stuff everywhere for next to nothing. Not so anymore. This is the opposite. This has gone the opposite way. It's on Editions EG. It's on Eno's label. And it's just a really good Afro-funk record. And horns. It's got some jazzy things going on. If you like Fela, it's not like Fela. There are short songs on it. And it's not a Fela record. But if you like things in that vein, you'll definitely want to check this out for like $5 or $10. Price might be a little higher on that because a record store owner will think, oh, it's African, I'll price it higher. Always look online. Okay, I was saying something about matter out of place earlier. And there's some artists that have done some things that have been not well received because they're not in the mainstream of what they're known for. Pat Metheny's a good example. So like the most cut out CDs I've ever seen were the Pat Metheny free jazz things. The one with Ornette Coleman's Song X. And then the one he did with Derek Bailey and two drummers. I can't remember the title of that. Both of those are amazing, by the way. And I think vinyl exists for Song X. In fact, I think I have that on LP. Anyway, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. So, David Byrne from the Talking Heads. Everybody wants everything he does to sound like the Talking Heads. This does not sound like the Talking Heads. This is a really great record. It's on ECM Records, and generally I try to shy away from the major labels, but there is some major label stuff in here. And I see this around a lot. I see this a lot at record shows. If you go to record shows, you're going to see certain records pop up again and again and again. This is one of them. And some people will try to get more money for it because it's a David Byrne record, but nobody ever buys it because it's music for a play. But it's way more interesting. Like, I don't know how you could have paid attention to the play because the music's so good. It's somewhat like his album that was a soundtrack for the Catherine Wheel, which was a dance performance by Twyla Tharp. And I used to have that on LP, but I got the CD because there's like 20 minutes of extra music on the CD. So that's why I have the CD of that. That's amazing. If you don't have the Catherine Wheel by David Byrne, get out there and get it. This is similar, but not as funky. It's a little more ethereal and actually kind of jazzy. There's a lot of horns on it. It's a great record though, and people want David Byrne to always be doing the talking heads, and or David Byrne for that matter. And it's just not always the case, but he's a tremendous artist and a big favorite of mine. Here's a record that I got years ago, and somebody said, "Oh, you'd like this," and they were right. I do like it. It's kind of a folk rock record, and Joe Bauer, you don't know who he is, because you're not 60 years old like me. Joe Bauer was in a group called the Youngbloods, who had a string of hits in the late 60s, early 70s, sort of hippie music, which we all love. And this record is Joe Bauer's instrumental jam band record. And it's not a real intense kind of sound. It's kind of a mellow folk rock, but it's instrumental. I've just found this record kind of pleasant. And I've tried to sell it and nobody wants to buy it. So it's not really heat. It's kind of lukewarm. No, but it's good. And I've met other people that have really dug this record. And over the years, I've played it some, and it's stayed in the collection. There's some really good musicians on it, too. A really great bass player named Michael Caine, and Steve Swallow's on a few tracks playing bass. Joe Bauer's a drummer, by the way. And Jack Gregg, also another great bassist. So there's 3 tremendous bassists on this album. But, oh, and Banana, who is also in the Youngbloods, a guy named Banana. He plays guitar and piano on it. So it's pretty mellow. It's kind of jazzy. It's just a cool record. And if you can find it, it's a pittance. Here's another kind of oddball record by an artist who is sort of out of his normal stream of work. This guy's name is Fred Katz, and he's a cellist. And he's best known amongst jazz guys for playing with Chico Hamilton, the drummer. A really amazing person, though. He lived well into his 90s. I think he's passed by now. And this was recently reissued on CD. And I reviewed it. I don't think anybody paid attention to my review. I found this record, though, years ago in a used record. No, not even a used record. It was a library sale record for 33 cents. And was completely blown away by how far ahead of its time this was. It's not strictly a jazz record, although it will help if you like jazz to like this record. Far out songs for far out folk. So he's taken a number of folk themes from music all over the world, a lot of Yiddish type stuff on here, and he's rearranged it and adapted it and changed it slightly so that it doesn't quite sound like what you expect it to sound like. You've heard of all the songs on this record. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, been in the pen so long, Old Paint, and Foggy Foggy Dew, and then the rest are Yiddish and klezmer type tunes. But there's no klezmer per se on this record. It's a really interesting record, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It's it's hard to categorize. There is a jazz undercurrent throughout this record, but it's very intricate. It kind of reminds me of some stuff that might have gotten on the Hat Art label in the 80s, like Franz Kogelman or something like that, but a little bit sweeter and easier to take than that. It's a really cool record. Fred Katz. So here's a group that just completely seemed to pass unnoticed in the 80s. And the 80s were a tough decade for me. Didn't like much music from the 80s. I mean, there was a whole harmonic thing, which was great. That was the saving grace. But there's a few other bands in the 80s that were doing it. And one of them is this band, the Ordinaires. And I mentioned them in another one of these videos. Jules Baptiste and Red Decade had some Ordinaires guys in it, and gals. And both of these records are instrumental rock records. They're not exactly progressive rock, although if you like progressive rock, you'll probably like these records. They're all instrumental, and they're, for the most part, they were original compositions, although this one has a killer version of Kashmir on it by Led Zeppelin. But it's basically a nonette, 9 people. And there's a bunch of strings and horns, and drums, bass. I don't think there's any piano on it. No, lots of saxophones, lots of guitars, lots of stringed instruments, no keyboards. These are just really really cool records, and they go for next to nothing. The Ordinaires, you might want to check them out. Another sort of downtown New York band that was just doing uncategorizable music that nobody knew what to make of it. Okay, I've been talking some about Prague, and here's a Prague record, kind of a jazzy Prague record that you might want to pay attention to if you're looking for something cheap and proggy, because progressive rock seems to be in these days. And this record is very, very much in the progressive rock vein. It's by a guy named Michael Zentner, who was in the Muffins for a while. And he plays violin and guitar. And he wrote all the songs. And there's some vocals on this, but the personnel on this is fascinating. It's like a star-studded cast. And in a way, it sort of detracts. There's not a real band sound to this. The percussion. The personnel shifts constantly from track to track. But the people on this record are amazing. John Graves is on it. Percy Jones from Brand X is on it. Hansford Rowe from Gong. Pierre Marlin's Gong's on it. Fred Frith is on several tracks. Kenwood Denard, the amazing drummer, deeply amazing drummer, is on 3 tracks. Alan Braufman, Valley of Search. Alan Braufman's on a couple of tracks. Carla Blaze on 1 track playing saxophone. Peter Blegvad sings backing vocals on a couple of tracks. So you get the idea. David Allen sings from Gong, sings background vocals on a track. So if you like progressive rock, especially sort of the rock in opposition kind of thing, and this gets a little jazzy, sort of in a curlew sort of way. I always found this album to be very pleasing, and again, it seems to be unknown and cheap. You can get copies on Discogs for like $10. At least last time I looked, you could. I could be wrong. Here's another band that I don't understand why the records are cheap, but they are, and they're called Zzebra with 2 Z's, so that they're at the very back end of your record collection. They did 2 records, and it's basically guys from the band If, right? Remember them from England, plus Lofty Amau on congas. I can't remember what band he was in. He might have been in an early version of Osabisa. I'm not sure. And the drummer on this is Liam Ganaki, who later on went to play drums for Trevor Watts, doing avant-garde jazz, and also in the band Gillan, in Ian Gillan's heavy metal band. So that gives you an idea how talented Liam Ganaki is. One of my favorite drummers, and his name is not spelled like the Italian potato pasta. Anyway, both of these albums are just really great. If you like horn rock, especially with sort of an African undercurrent, there's not many bands doing that, actually, as I say that. Zzebra, there's definitely an African influence on a lot of their music, but it's also kind of jazzy horn rock, but it's not pure jazz, and it's not fusion, you know, in a Mahavishnu or Weather Report sense. If you like If, that would help. But these records are both fantastic, and they don't go for much at all, and I've actually seen them around in used record stores. Getting closer to the jazz world now, I'm going to hit you with a couple of Brazilian records that could be had for next to nothing. This guy in particular had a string of records on Warner Brothers and Arista that were fantastic, and this is my favorite of the lot. Identity, it's on Arista, a major label, sorry. But it's essentially an Egberto Gismonti record with Airto's out in front for sure, singing and playing drums, but Egberto wrote most of the music. And the band on this is just killing all the way through. Airto, Roberto Silva, John Hurd, David Amaro, wonderful electric guitarist from Brazil. Of course, Egberto, Wayne Shorter's on a few tracks, Herbie Hancock's on a few tracks. And if you ever see this, grab it. It's really quite good. It's definitely in the fusion vein. It's not a folkloric Brazilian sound at all. It's a hard fusion record. I wouldn't say heavy fusion because it's not like Mahavishnu, but it's serious record. If you enjoyed the Paul Horn Altura do Sol, for example, this is very much like that. Another Brazilian record that I see around for not much money is this one, and this is such a classic. And if you like jazz or Brazilian music at all, you should just try to find this as soon as possible. Famously, Carlos Santana covered the title track Stoneflower on Caravanserai on, I think it's his 4th record, and really did a fantastic job. Added vocals though. This is all instrumental, and it's on CTI, everyone's favorite label. And again, the personnel on this is great. Ron Carter, Eumir Deodato, Joao Palma on drums, one of the great Brazilian drummers. Airto, of course, is on it. Joe Farrell, Hubert Laws, all the usual suspects. But this is a killing Brazilian record. And it's, again, not pure jazz, but it'll help if you like jazz. I like jazz. I actually love jazz. Literally. I'm going to wrap it up. I got a couple of rock records and a Latin rock record that's killer. I see this around quite a bit. Maybe it's because I live in New Mexico, but I see a lot of El Chicano records for a pittance in this area. And I think this is the best of the lot. Some of their later stuff's pretty cool too. This is all instrumental. And it's a Latin jazz record, really. They do In a Silent Way on it. They do Senor Blues by Horace Silver. They do Brown Eyed Girl. And they do I Feel Free, one of my favorite Cream tracks. But I think this has got some vocals on it. I thought it was all instrumental, but it's not. Anyway, if you're looking for some heavy Latin rock excitement that doesn't cost you much money, El Chicano, any of their, I would say, first 4 or 5 records are worth getting. I used to have a bunch of them, but I think I sold all of them, except that one. They're good records, though. Just because I sell things doesn't mean I don't like them. Got a couple of rock records to wrap it up. Mick Taylor, wonderful, fantastic guitarist from John Mayall's band, and later on the Rolling Stones, and later on his own bands. I don't know what he's doing now, but this is a great record. It's got Pierre Morlaine on drums on a bunch of it. And there's some vocal tracks on it, and there's some sort of jazz rock type tracks on this. But it's a really cool record. And I've seen it for next to nothing. It's kind of a mixture of different feels. There's some blues on here. There's some, jazzy rockers. It kind of reminds me in a way of a somewhat more focused version of a Harvey Mandel record. If you like that kind of guitar heavy, guitar solo heavy kind of music, jamming music, you'll like this. And I think he sings a little bit on this, and he's not a bad vocalist. I think he sings on it. Maybe he doesn't. I have to look. But yeah, it does look like he sings a little bit. But Lowell George is on a cut, so it's kind of got a swamp feel to it. I've always liked this record. Mick Taylor. It's just called Mick Taylor. It's on CBS, again, another major label. Finally, the last one. And I could go on forever. There's so many records like this. It's ridiculous. This group was completely ignored when they existed in the early 70s. Hanson. And it's sort of a heavy, funky rock sound. They're on Manticore Records, which was essentially ELP's label. And the guys on this, you've heard of all these guys. Jean Roussel on keyboards. He's also on the Mick Taylor record that I just showed. And Junior Hanson on guitar, very, very Hendrix-influenced guitarist. Conrad Isidore on drums later on, played with Robin Trower, a real favorite musician of mine. And Clive Chayman on bass, who played with Annette Peacock and Jeff Beck. So this is this group has incredible pedigree, and they do that funky rock, Hendrix-influenced rock thing really well. They did several records. This is the only one I have. I really like this. And I think it shipped cut out. I don't think I've ever seen a copy of this that wasn't either used or cut out. This is not cut out. Anyway, it's on Manticore, which is best known for putting out the U.S. versions of the PFM records and also a bunch of Emerson, Lake and Palmer records. Anyway, time has passed. You're probably getting tired of listening to me and looking at me. The music ended, so I'm going to end this. Thanks again. Feel free to send me your suggestions. I'll be back soon with more jazz and maybe more rock and world music and other stuff, other just weird stuff that I dug up that I looked for online, and it's not all that expensive. And again, you know, most of these records could be had for, certainly all of them could be had for less than $20 a piece. Most of them for less than 10 easily. And you just got to keep looking. You got to keep digging. You got to get out there and be persistent and be a record collector. Anyway, I hope you're having fun watching these, and thank you very much.